The wind had a bite to it that evening, the kind that promises a storm is on its way. You could smell the ozone in the air, sharp and clean, mingling with the familiar scent of chlorine from the community pool. I was standing at the deep end, watching the last two teenagers finish their laps. They were good kids, a little wild, but they listened. Coaching them was the one part of my week that felt normal. It was the one place I still felt connected to Elena. This whole thing started because of a simple kindness, I guess. If you're watching Karenology, you already know where this is going. It's never just a simple misunderstanding. That's when I saw them. Two men in black tactical vests, walking with that stiff, self-important gait that only private security can pull off. They stopped at the gate, and a third man stepped through. He was older, with a soft gut pushing against a crisp uniform shirt and a face that looked like it had been carved from stale bread. This was Riggs, the head of Aegis Security, the firm our homeowners association had hired a few months back. "Closing time, coach," Riggs said, his voice like gravel grinding together. I glanced at the clock on the wall. "We've got another 15 minutes, Riggs." He gave a thin, unpleasant smile. "Not anymore. Your access has been revoked, effective immediately." He nodded to one of his goons, who stepped forward and blocked the path to the locker rooms. The teenagers stopped swimming, treading water, and watching with wide, nervous eyes. This was the point. Humiliation is always more effective with an audience. "Revoked? On what grounds?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Let's just say the board is reviewing your activities," he said, enjoying every second. "You're a liability." To prove his point, he gestured to the gate's card reader. "Go on, try it." I pulled out my key card, the blue plastic worn smooth over the years. I held it to the reader. The light blinked red. "Access denied." The click echoed in the sudden silence, louder than a gunshot. I felt a hot flush of anger crawl up my neck. But that wasn't the worst of it. Here's what I need you to understand. I had my bag on a bench. Inside it was a worn, leather-bound notebook. It was Elena's, my late wife. She'd been a competitive swimmer. She filled that book with her training notes, lap times, little motivational quotes. After she was gone, I kept it up. I'd jot down notes on the kids I was coaching, drills, progress. It was a way to keep talking to her. Riggs saw the bag. He walked over, unzipped it, and pulled out the notebook. He held it between his thumb and forefinger like it was something filthy. "No personal items in the pool area, new rule." And then he did it. He walked over to the trash can, the one overflowing with empty soda cans and wet paper towels, and dropped it in. The sound of it hitting the bottom, a soft, muffled thud, broke something inside me. For a second, the world went quiet. The wind, the water, the nervous breathing of the kids, it all disappeared. All I could see was that trash can. Have you ever had a memory so sacred it felt like a physical part of you? And then watch someone defile it right in front of your eyes. The kids scrambled out of the pool, grabbed their towels, and hurried away, not looking at me. I didn't blame them. When the wolves show up, the sheep scatter. I walked over to the trash can and reached in, my hand brushing against something wet and sticky before my fingers closed around the spine of the notebook. I pulled it out. A brown smear of who knows what stained the cover. I turned to face Riggs. He was still smiling. "You have a good night now," he said, then turned and walked away, his two bookends falling into step behind him. That night, I sat in my kitchen, the damaged notebook open on the table. I carefully blotted the pages with a paper towel. The smell of garbage clung to it. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, clear rage I hadn't felt in years. I'm a risk assessment auditor. My job is to see the patterns, to find the cracks in the system before they break wide open. I deal with contracts, insurance policies, and safety protocols. I believe in rules. I believe in order. So I did what a man like me does. I opened my laptop and wrote a calm, formal complaint to the Homeowners Association Board, detailing the incident with Riggs and the unauthorized revocation of my access. I attached a scan of my lease agreement, the one that clearly stated my right to use the common facilities. I was going to fight this by the book. The response came 2 days later. Not an email, not a phone call. It was a sterile white envelope in my mailbox, bearing the Homeowners Association logo. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't an apology, it was a formal notice, citing a bylaw I'd never heard of. ordering me to cease and desist all unlicensed and uninsured instructional activities. At the bottom was a bill, a $5,000 fine for breaching security protocols. They weren't just ignoring me, they were building a wall, and they were sending me the bill for the bricks. If you've ever felt that sting of injustice, the one that tells you the game is rigged, maybe hit that like button. Let me know I'm not alone. The next day, it got worse. The attack went public. Every mailbox in the neighborhood had a cheap photocopied flyer in it. No logo, no name. Just stark black text on white paper. It accused an unnamed resident of running an uninsured coaching service, putting the community's children at risk and exposing the entire neighborhood to a lawsuit. It didn't name me, but it didn't have to. Everyone knew who it was about. I stood there, holding that flimsy piece of paper, and felt the eyes of my neighbors through their windows. The whispers had begun. The foundations of your home aren't just concrete and wood. They're the trust you have with the people around you. And with one anonymous lie, mine were starting to crumble. That evening, I poured myself a drink I didn't need and opened Elena's notebook again, turning the stained pages. I was just looking for a memory of her, a bit of her strength. I went to the last page she'd written on, a few weeks before the accident. Her familiar, elegant script listed her lap times. But then I saw it. A small note, scribbled in the margin, the ink slightly blurred as if a drop of water had hit it. It wasn't about swimming. It was 3 simple words that made the hair on my arms stand up. It said, "They watch at night." The words on the page seemed to pulse in the dim kitchen light. My wife's handwriting, usually so graceful, was tight and hurried. I traced the letters with my finger. Who were they? And what were they watching? The thought sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. All this time, I thought I was fighting a petty tyrant in a homeowners association. But Elena had seen something else, something that scared her. For the next few nights, sleep was a stranger. I'd find myself at the window, peering through the blinds at the empty, silent street. The pool was a dark, still mirror under the moon. The parking lot was a grid of shadows. I saw nothing, but the feeling of being watched was a constant weight on my shoulders. The flyers, the fine, Riggs's smug face. It was all a coordinated attack. They weren't just trying to get rid of me. They were trying to break me. And one night, they almost did. I couldn't stay in the house anymore. The silence was too loud, filled with memories and the ghost of Elena's warning. I grabbed my keys and drove down to the end of the street, parking where I had a clear view of the pool and the clubhouse, the same spot where I used to wait for Elena to finish her late-night swims. The sheer injustice of it all crashed over me. They had taken the last place that connected me to her and turned it into a battlefield. They had taken her memory in that notebook and tossed it in the trash. I leaned my forehead against the cold glass of the steering wheel. The engine ticked as it cooled, and I just shattered. It wasn't loud. It was a silent, gut-wrenching sob that shook my whole body. All the grief I'd been holding back, all the frustration and helplessness, it all came pouring out in that dark, empty car. You ever feel so completely alone that the whole world just seems to fade to gray? I sat there for, I don't know how long, just hollowed out. But when the tears stopped, something else was left in their place. A cold, hard resolve. This wasn't about me anymore. This was for Elena. They were desecrating her memory. And I was going to find out why. I wasn't going to fight them with angry emails anymore. I was going to fight them my way. As an auditor, I was going to find their weak spot and press until it broke. The first step was to understand the system. They watch at night. That meant surveillance. The next morning, I was on my laptop, not writing complaints, but digging. I found the public records for the Homeowners Association's recent contracts. Aegis Security was obvious, but there was another one. Sentinel Systems LLC, for a full security camera upgrade. A little more digging led me to a list of their recently terminated employees. One name stood out. May, fired a month ago. Reason listed, insubordination. I found her working at a Greasy Spoon diner on the other side of town. The air smelled of stale coffee and fried bacon. She was young, maybe 23, with tired eyes and a tattoo of a circuit board on her forearm. I sat at the counter and ordered a coffee. "You're May?" I asked when she brought it over. She looked at me, wary. "Who's asking?" My name is David. I live in the Northwood Creek community. You installed our cameras. Her face tightened. Yeah, well, I don't work for Sentinel anymore, so if you've got a problem, call them. She started to turn away. I'm not here to complain, I said quickly. I'm here because I think you were fired for asking the right questions. She stopped. She turned back slowly, her eyes searching my face. What kind of questions? Questions about camera placement, about blind spots. A flicker of something, anger, maybe vindication, crossed her face. She glanced around the diner, then leaned in closer, lowering her voice. Meet me in the back alley in 10 minutes, when my break starts. 10 minutes later, we were standing by a dented dumpster, the hum of a ventilation fan buzzing over our heads. It was Riggs, she said, without any preamble. The guy from Aegis. He was there for the whole installation. He was the one who specified the placements. I told him, I said, this is a terrible layout. You've got massive dead zones here and here. She was talking fast now, the words tumbling out, especially around the service entrance to the parking lot and the whole back fence line. Anyone could hop that fence or drive a truck through that gate, and not a single camera would see it. It's incompetent. What did he say? I asked. He told me to do my job and shut my mouth. He said, the client gets what the client wants. I argued. I told him it was a liability. My boss backed him up. A week later, I was fired for having a bad attitude. She kicked at a loose piece of gravel. They made me sign an NDA. But you have the plans, don't you? I asked softly. The original schematics for the camera layout. A slow smile spread across her face. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for a chance to get even. I might have kept a copy, for my personal portfolio. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her back pocket and handed it to me. It was a blueprint of the community grounds. The camera locations were marked with little red circles, and the areas she'd mentioned, the service gate, the back fence, were stark, empty white spaces. They weren't just blind spots, they were intentional black holes in the security net. Why are you helping me? I asked. Because I hate bullies, she said, her eyes hard. And that guy Riggs, he's a bully. Just be careful. These guys don't play nice. I walked back to my car, the folded map feeling heavy in my hand. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a weapon. I sat in the driver's seat and unfolded it, the dome light casting a pale glow on the schematics. I traced the dead zones with my finger. What would you need a hole that big for? A hole big enough to drive a truck through unseen. That's when I saw it. A black sedan, the same model as the Aegis patrol cars, parked across the street. It was too far away to see the driver's face clearly, but I didn't need to. The car just sat there, engine off, a silent observer in the dark. It hadn't been there when I went into the diner. It was watching me. They weren't just watching at night anymore. They were watching me now. The car door slammed shut, and in the reflection of the window, I saw my own face, a stranger framed by the fire he was meant to prevent. The black sedan across the street didn't move. Its headlights were off, making it a predator hiding in the shadows. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden quiet of my car. This is where they stopped playing games. I didn't go home. You can't lead a wolf back to your own den. I pulled out onto the main road, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. The sedan's lights flicked on, and it pulled out, keeping a steady, comfortable distance. I made a right turn I didn't need to make. It followed. I took a left into a deserted industrial park. It stayed with me, a loyal shadow I never asked for. The paranoia wasn't in my head anymore. It was on my six, patient and persistent. I needed to think, to find a corner of the world where I could be anonymous for an hour. I ended up at a place called the Rusty Anchor, a dive bar on the edge of town, where the neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat. The place smelled of stale beer and regret. I slid onto a bar stool, the cracked vinyl cold against my legs, and ordered a club soda. I just needed a moment to process the map in my pocket and the car that was probably still waiting outside. The bartender, a man with a tired face and a name tag that said Sal, wiped down the counter in front of me. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "You have no idea," I muttered. We exchanged a few meaningless words, the weather, the local sports team. He seemed like a decent guy, the kind who's seen it all and doesn't judge. For a few minutes, listening to the low murmur of the other patrons and the clink of glasses, I almost felt normal. It was a dangerous illusion. Have you ever been so desperate for a moment of peace that you let your guard down? I stayed for about an hour, watching the clock on the wall. When I finally walked out, the air was cold and clean. I scanned the street. The sedan was gone. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe I'd shaken them. Maybe it was all just a bad dream. I got in my car and started driving home, the relief making me feel lightheaded. I turned onto my street, and that's when I saw it, an angry orange glow pulsing against the dark sky, right where the community grounds should be. The smell hit me a second later. Acrid smoke, the scent of burning wood, and something chemical, like melting plastic. I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The old equipment shed next to the pool parking lot was a roaring inferno. Flames, 10, 15 feet high, chewed through the wooden walls and licked at the overhanging branches of the nearby pine trees. People were spilling out of their houses, their faces lit by the terrifying dance of the fire, and through the chaos, I heard the approaching wail of sirens. My first thought was risk, liability. I'm a risk auditor. It's burned into my brain. I started running toward the fire, trying to see if it was spreading to the clubhouse. And then I saw him, Riggs, standing with his arms crossed, watching the blaze with a look of calm satisfaction. He wasn't panicked. He was admiring his work. When his eyes met mine, a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He pointed a finger at me, a grand theatrical gesture for the growing crowd of neighbors. "There he is," he yelled, his voice cutting through the crackle of the flames. "That's the guy. I told you all he was unstable. I told you he was a threat." The fire trucks and 2 sheriff's department cruisers screamed into the parking lot. A deputy, young and serious, made a beeline for me, drawn by Riggs's accusation. "Sir, I need you to stay back," he said, putting a hand on my chest. "He did this!" Riggs shouted. "He threatened us!" Before I could even form a denial, a new voice cut in. "Officer, he's right." I turned. It was Sal, the bartender from the Rusty Anchor. He was standing there, his face pale and beaded with sweat, looking terrified, but his voice was steady. "That guy," he said, pointing at me, "he was in my bar not an hour ago. He was furious, ranting, said he was going to light a fire under the board, said he'd make them all pay." The world tilted on its axis. The betrayal was so swift, so complete, it stole the air from my lungs. Every neighbor's face turned toward me, their suspicion hardening into certainty. I was no longer a neighbor. I was an arsonist. The deputy's expression changed. The professionalism in his eyes was replaced by cold suspicion. "Sir, I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back." It was happening. This was their endgame. It wasn't about a key or a notebook. It was about removing me completely. The click of the handcuffs snapping shut was deafening. They were cold and heavy on my wrists. As the deputy led me toward the patrol car, I felt the collective stare of my community on my back, 100 points of judgment. I was shoved into the back of the cruiser. Through the swirling smoke and the flashing red and blue lights that painted the scene in strobes of chaos, I saw Riggs. He was standing next to Sal, the bartender. He clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of a job well done. Then he looked at me, locked in the back of a cop car, and gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible mock salute. The door slammed shut, plunging me into a dark, suffocating silence. The wail of the sirens suddenly muffled. I was framed. I was betrayed. And I was utterly, completely trapped. The silence in the back of the patrol car was a physical thing, a thick blanket of despair. The world outside was a smear of flashing lights and distorted faces pressed against windows. My hands were cuffed behind my back, the cold metal biting into my wrists. Framed, betrayed. I kept replaying the scene in my head. Sal's pale, sweating face, his practiced lie, Riggs's triumphant salute. How much did they pay him? Or was a threat enough? What would you do if you were in his shoes? Lie to save your own skin? It's a question you never want to have to answer. The interrogation room was exactly like you see in the movies. Cinderblock walls painted a sickly shade of green. A metal table bolted to the floor. The air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. A detective, a heavy-set man named Miller with weary eyes and a mustache that had seen better decades, sat across from me. He slid a file across the table. "So, David, you had a bad night." It wasn't a question. I told him the truth, all of it. The harassment from Riggs, the deactivation of my key, the trash notebook, the anonymous flyers, the bartender's lie. I talked for 20 minutes straight, my voice raw. Miller listened patiently, not interrupting. When I was done, he sighed, a long, tired sound. "It's a good story," he said, and my heart sank. He didn't believe a word. "Here's my problem. I have a dozen witnesses who heard you threaten the homeowners association. I have a bartender who says you were talking about fire. I have a security chief who filed multiple complaints about your unstable behavior, and I have you at the scene of the crime." "The bartender is lying. Riggs is a criminal," I said, my voice rising. "Everyone's a criminal to the guy in the hot seat," Miller said, his tone flat. He leaned forward. "Let me give you some free advice. You're a respected member of this community, a man with a clean record. Don't throw your life away over a grudge with your neighborhood board. Tell me what happened. Maybe you just lost your temper. Maybe it was an accident. We can work with that." He was offering me a deal, a confession to a lesser charge, an easy way out that would brand me a felon for the rest of my life. The taste in my mouth was like ash. "I'm telling you the truth, detective." He just shook his head, closed the file, and stood up. "Have it your way." They let me go a few hours later. "Insufficient evidence to hold," was the official line. But I knew what it really meant. It meant they were building a case. It meant I was a suspect, free on a very short leash. When I got home, there was a notice taped to my front door, a bright red violation sticker from the County Code Enforcement Office flapping in the pre-dawn breeze. An emergency injunction barring me from coming within 500 feet of the community common areas pending an investigation into the fire. They had won. They had locked me out, discredited me, framed me for a felony, and now legally banished me from the very land I was trying to protect. I slumped against the door, the paper crinkling in my hand. I was an island, cut off, isolated. For a moment, I thought about just packing a bag and leaving, driving until the town was a memory in my rearview mirror. What would you have done? Stick around and fight a battle you're clearly losing, or cut your losses and save yourself? If you're still with me, drop a comment. I'm genuinely curious. That thought, the urge to run, was what saved me. It was the coward's way out. It was what they wanted, and I wasn't going to give it to them. I spent the next 2 days a ghost in my own house, curtains drawn. I needed evidence, not a story, not a theory, cold, hard proof. I took out the camera layout May had given me. They watch at night. The blind spots, the fire, the bartender's lie. It was all connected. But how? My job is risk assessment. You look at a system, you find the stress points, and you test them. The system here was Aegis Security and their fraudulent reports to the homeowners association. The stress point was their lie. Riggs was billing the board for 5-man patrols every night. But Elena's note, the blind spots, my gut. It all screamed that was a lie, proving it was the problem. And that's when it hit me. An idea so simple, so direct, I almost laughed. My specialty isn't just finding risks, it's auditing them. I couldn't get on the property myself. But I had something that could, a drone. Not just any drone, a commercial-grade quadcopter with a high-resolution thermal imaging camera. I used it for inspecting HVAC systems on commercial roofs and checking for thermal leaks in building envelopes. I spent the rest of the day calibrating it, charging the batteries, plotting a flight path that would keep it out of sight. I needed wind, a good stiff breeze to mask the sound of the rotors. I checked the weather report. A front was moving in, strong gusts forecast after midnight. Perfect. That night, as the wind began to howl outside, I felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, the hunter's focus I hadn't felt in years. I drove to a wooded area about half a mile from the community, a spot that was public land. I set up my command station in the back of my SUV, laptop, power inverter, a high-gain antenna. At 2 a.m., I launched. The drone was a dark shape against a darker sky, climbing silently into the turbulent air. On my laptop screen, the world transformed into a shifting landscape of heat signatures. The pavement was a cool blue. The houses were warm yellow blobs. I navigated it toward the back fence of the community, to the biggest blind spot on May's map. The screen was a cool, uniform blue. Nothing. I flew a grid pattern over the entire area. Nothing. For a second, my heart sank. Was I wrong? Had Elena been wrong? Then I saw it, a flash of heat near the service gate. I zoomed in. A single car, its engine a bright orange-yellow blob, was parked just inside the dead zone. One man was in the driver's seat, not 5 men patrolling. One man, sitting in his car, probably watching movies on his phone. This was the fraud. This was the proof. But then something else happened, something that changed everything. A large truck, its engine and tires glowing white-hot on the thermal camera, pulled up to the service gate from the outside. The gate, which should have been locked, swung open. The lone guard got out of his car. He didn't challenge the truck. He walked over and started helping the driver unload boxes. They were using the dead zone not just to cover up their lazy patrols. They were using it as a transfer point, a secure, unmonitored drop zone. I was so focused on the boxes, I almost missed him. A third man stepped out of the shadows. He wasn't a guard. He was wearing a suit. Even in the grainy thermal image, I recognized the arrogant posture, the distinctive shape. It was Riggs. He was overseeing the whole operation. My hands trembled as I hit the record button. This was it. This was everything. It wasn't just about overbilling for patrols. It was something bigger, some kind of smuggling right under our noses. I watched for another 10 minutes as they finished unloading. The guard locked the gate, and the truck drove off. Riggs got into the parked sedan, the same one that had tailed me, and left. I landed the drone and packed up my gear, my mind racing. I had them, on video. But as I drove home, a cold dread began to replace the triumphant thrill. Who was I going to show this to? The police, who already thought I was an arsonist? The homeowners association board, who were clearly in on it? I had a weapon, but I was surrounded by the enemy. I pulled into my driveway and killed the engine, and the screen of my laptop glowed in the dark. I had the proof, but revealing it could be a death sentence. That grainy thermal video became my whole world. I watched it 100 times, sitting in the dark of my office, the glow of the laptop painting my face, Riggs, the truck, the boxes. It was all there, a silent movie of their crime, but having the video and being able to use it were two very different things. It felt like holding a live grenade. Pull the pin and it could take them out, or it could blow up in my face. What do you do when the only people you can trust are the ones you can't go to? My first thought was May. She'd trusted me with the map. Maybe she'd know what to do with the video. I met her at the diner again, the smell of burnt coffee feeling strangely comforting this time. I showed her the footage on my phone. Her eyes went wide. "I knew it," she whispered, a mix of fear and excitement in her voice. "I knew they were dirty." She looked up at me. "You have to take this to the police, now." "The police think I'm a suspect in an arson case they cooked up," I reminded her gently. "I walk in there with this, they'll charge me with illegal surveillance, bury the video, and throw away the key. Riggs will walk." "So, what then?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "You can't just sit on this." "No," I said, an idea starting to form, an ugly, risky idea. "I can't, but I don't need the police to bring them down. I need a lever, something that scares them more than the law does." Her expression turned to worry. "What are you planning, David?" "Aegis is a franchise," I said, thinking out loud. "Their biggest fear isn't a local sheriff. It's their corporate headquarters, a public scandal, proof of franchise fraud. That could cost them their entire business. That's the financial kill switch." "So you're going to blackmail them?" "No," I said. "I'm going to set a trap, and I need your help." The plan was simple, and that's what made it so dangerous. I needed to get Riggs and his operation on clear, undeniable video. Not just thermal blobs, but high-definition color. And I needed to do it in a way that couldn't be dismissed as a one-off event. I needed to show a pattern. That meant planting our own cameras inside the blind spot. May was the key. She knew the hardware. She knew how to hide it. The next night, while the lone Aegis guard was likely sleeping in his car, we went to work. Dressed in black, we moved through the woods behind the community, the crunch of dry leaves under our feet sounding like thunder. It felt like a scene from a spy movie, only our hearts were hammering with real fear, not scripted suspense. May was incredible. She moved with a quiet efficiency, installing 3 tiny, motion-activated cameras powered by long-life batteries. One overlooking the service gate, one hidden in a birdhouse aimed at the parking area. The last one, the riskiest, was attached with magnetic tape to the underside of a metal bench right in the middle of the dead zone. As she was finishing the last one, we heard it, the sound of a car engine. Headlights swept across the trees, and we dove into a ditch, pressing ourselves into the damp earth. The smell of wet leaves and decay was thick in my nose. It was an Aegis patrol car. It cruised slowly past our position, then stopped. The beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping the fence line. It paused, lingering on the spot where we had just been. My blood ran cold. Had they seen us? The light moved on. The car drove away. We waited, not breathing, for what felt like an eternity before crawling out of the ditch, covered in mud and shaking. "Let's go," I whispered. "Now!" For the next 2 days, we had nothing. I started to think we'd spooked them. Maybe they knew we were onto them. The legal pressure on me was mounting. I got another letter, this one from the Homeowners Association's lawyer. A civil suit. They were suing me for the cost of the destroyed shed and damages to the community's reputation. They weren't just trying to put me in jail, they were trying to bankrupt me. It was my lowest point. Have you ever been there? When every door is closed, every path is blocked, and the walls are just closing in? I sat with that letter in my hand, feeling the weight of it all. It was working. Their campaign of attrition was grinding me down. For a moment, a dark, quiet part of my mind whispered, "Just give up. It's not worth it." Then, on the third night, my phone buzzed. A notification from the camera app. Motion detected. I opened the feed. My heart leaped. It was them. The same truck. The same routine. The camera in the birdhouse gave us a perfect view. Riggs was there, overseeing it all. They were unloading boxes again. I zoomed in, trying to see what was inside. The resolution wasn't good enough to read any labels. But the third camera, the one under the bench, gave us the jackpot. It captured one of the men, a young guard I didn't recognize, dropping a box. It split open. I froze the frame and zoomed in. The box was filled with electronics, high-end computer chips, the kind that were in massive shortage globally, worth a fortune on the black market. This wasn't just smuggling. This was a multi-million-dollar operation. "We got them," I breathed, saving the video clip. "We finally got them." The next morning, I sent an anonymous encrypted email to the Aegis corporate headquarters. The subject line was, "Franchise fraud in Northwood Creek." The body of the email was simple. It contained a single, crystal-clear, still frame from the video. Riggs's face, illuminated by the truck's headlights, standing over an open box of stolen computer chips. And one sentence, "More to come. You have 48 hours to clean your house, or this goes public." The clock was ticking. I had poked the bear. Now I had to wait and see if it would run, or if it would turn and maul me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside, sounded like a threat. I sat in the dark with my phone in my hand, watching the empty street. I had started a war with men who burned things down for a living, and I suddenly felt very, very exposed. The knock on the door came just after midnight. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a hard, heavy fist pounding on the wood. I froze. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Just one word. "Run." The knock vibrated through the floor, a physical blow that echoed the frantic pounding in my chest. "Run." The text message glowed on my phone, a single stark command. I didn't know who it was from, and I didn't have time to care. The pounding on the door came again, harder this time, accompanied by a voice. It was Riggs. "David, I know you're in there. Open up. We need to talk." His voice was smooth, but underneath it was an edge of coiled steel. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My mind was racing. The front door was a solid core, but it wouldn't last forever. The back door led to a small fenced yard, a trap. The windows were a possibility, but they'd hear the glass break. Then I remembered my training, not the risk assessment stuff, something older, something I hadn't needed in a long, long time. Before Elena, before the quiet suburban life, I'd done a stint in the army, nothing heroic, just logistics. But part of that training was evasion. How to think when you're cornered. The first rule, never use the obvious exits. I backed away from the door, my socked feet silent on the hardwood floor. I moved toward the garage. The pounding on the front door stopped. A new sound started, the sickening splinter of wood. They weren't asking anymore. I slipped into the garage and hit the button for the main door. The motor whirred to life, a deafening sound in the quiet night. It was a gamble, a loud, obvious distraction. As the heavy door began its slow, groaning ascent, I darted to the small side door of the garage, the one that opened onto the narrow path between my house and my neighbor's. I unlocked it, slipped through, and pulled it shut just as I heard the crash of my front door giving way. I didn't run. I moved low and fast, hugging the shadows along the side of the house. I could hear them inside, their heavy boots on my floors. "Check the upstairs," one of them yelled. I made it to the back fence, vaulted over it, and landed in the overgrown yard of the house behind mine. I kept moving, a ghost in the suburban labyrinth, until I was several blocks away. I found a dark park, a playground empty of children, and slumped onto a bench, my lungs burning, my mind a chaotic storm. The text message. Who had sent it? It had to be someone on the inside, someone who knew what Riggs was planning. The only person I could think of was the young guard, the one whose face I'd seen in the video, the one who dropped the box. Maybe he had a conscience. Maybe he was just scared. I had the video files stored in the cloud, but my laptop was in the house. Everything was in the house. I had my phone, the clothes on my back, and a war I had no idea how to win. Sending the email to corporate had been a colossal mistake. I thought it would make them fold. Instead, it made them come for me. I stayed on that bench until the first hint of dawn painted the sky a bruised purple. I needed a new plan. The old one had literally gone up in smoke. What's the one thing they couldn't control? Public opinion. They had twisted it against me once with their flyers and lies. It was time to twist it back. The community had an annual summer fair. Founders' Day, they called it. A wholesome gathering with bake sales, a petting zoo, and speeches from the Homeowners Association board. It was in 3 days. It was a public event, on public ground. My injunction didn't apply. And it was the perfect stage. I called May. "I need you," I said, my voice hoarse. "And I need a projector, a big one, and speakers." "David, are you okay? Where are you?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "I'm fine. Can you get them?" There was a pause. "Yeah," she said, "I can." The next piece was the riskiest. I needed an audience, a captive one. The main event of the fair was always the State of the Community address from the Homeowners Association president. That meant Riggs would be there, standing behind the board members, playing the part of the vigilant protector. I also needed a new ally, someone with nothing to lose. I thought of the young guard, the one I suspected had sent the text. I didn't know his name, but I knew he was part of the night crew. I spent the next night watching from a distance using a pair of binoculars. I saw him. He seemed nervous, jumpy. He kept looking over his shoulder. I waited until he was alone, taking a smoke break by the service gate. I approached him carefully, my hands raised. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I said. "You sent me the text." He almost jumped out of his skin. He looked around wildly. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "Listen to me," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Riggs is using you. When this goes down, you'll be the one left holding the bag. I have everything on video. I can protect you. But you have to help me." I told him my plan. He listened, his face a mask of terror. But underneath the terror, I saw a flicker of hope. He agreed. The day of the fair was bright and sunny, a perfect summer day. The park was filled with families. The smell of popcorn and grilled hot dogs filled the air. It felt surreal, this scene of perfect Americana, knowing the rot that festered just beneath the surface. I saw May setting up near the main stage. She had the projector and speakers hidden behind a row of portable toilets, powered by a car battery. We had one shot at this. At noon, the Homeowners Association board took the stage. Riggs stood behind them, arms crossed, sunglasses on, surveying the crowd like a king. The president, a woman named Carol who always looked perpetually annoyed, stepped up to the microphone. "Welcome, neighbors, to our annual Founders' Day celebration," she began, her voice echoing across the park. "It's been a challenging year, but thanks to the diligent work of our board and our partners at Aegis Security, our community is safer than ever." That was the cue. The young guard I'd spoken to, who was supposed to be managing the stage's power supply, suddenly tripped. He stumbled against the main junction box. The microphone cut out with a squeal of feedback. Carol tapped it. "Is this thing on?" she asked, annoyed. In that moment of confused silence, another sound filled the air. A deep, resonant hum. The projector May had set up whirred to life. and on the huge white side of a rental truck parked next to the stage, a makeshift screen, an image appeared. It was the thermal footage, the grainy, damning video of the single guard sleeping in his car. A low murmur went through the crowd. Then the screen switched. It was the high-definition color footage from May's hidden cameras, the truck, the boxes, the illegal transfer of stolen goods. The crowd gasped. The board members on stage turned, their faces a mixture of confusion and horror. And then came the finale, the camera under the bench, the close-up of the dropped box, split open, revealing the stolen microchips. And standing right there, his face clear as day, was Riggs. The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the grass. Every eye in that park was on the screen, and then on the man standing on the stage. I stepped out from behind the rental truck, a wireless microphone in my hand. "This," I said, my voice booming through the speakers May had set up, "is your security. This is what you're paying for, not protection, a cover for a criminal operation." Riggs was frozen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He ripped off his sunglasses. His eyes found me in the crowd. For a second I thought he was going to charge me, but he was trapped, surrounded by 100 witnesses, 100 cell phones, all now pointed at him, all recording. Carol, the board president, looked like she was going to be sick. The crowd wasn't murmuring anymore. They were shouting, angry, betrayed voices. The wholesome community fair had turned into a tribunal, and the verdict was coming in. The shouting of the crowd was a physical wave of sound washing over the stage. Riggs was a statue, trapped in the glare of 100 cell phone cameras. The Homeowners Association board members were scattering like cockroaches in the light, babbling denials and pointing fingers at each other. Carol, the president, just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, no sound coming out. I walked toward the stage, the microphone heavy in my hand. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. Their faces were a mixture of shock, anger, and a dawning, grudging respect. They weren't looking at an arsonist anymore. They were looking at the man who had pulled back the curtain. "For months," I said, my voice steady and clear, amplified by the speakers, "these people have been lying to you. They've been stealing from you. They created a crisis so they could sell you a solution. And the solution was a criminal enterprise." I saw Detective Miller pushing his way through the crowd, his face grim. He wasn't looking at me this time. He was looking at Riggs. "This man," I continued, pointing at Riggs, "framed me for a fire he likely started himself to get me out of the way. He threatened and intimidated my neighbors into silence. He used your money to fund his operation, right under your noses, on the very land you thought he was protecting." Riggs finally broke. He wasn't a cool, calculating professional anymore. He was a cornered animal. He lunged, not at me, but toward the side of the stage, trying to escape. But there was nowhere to go. 2 deputies were already there, cutting off his path. Miller met him at the bottom of the steps. "Mr. Riggs," Miller said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet, "I think you and I have a lot to talk about." The click of the handcuffs was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The aftermath was a blur. The Aegis corporate office, faced with a public relations nightmare of epic proportions, terminated the franchise agreement on the spot. They sent in a team of their own auditors who, in a desperate attempt to damage control, cooperated fully with the police investigation. They threw Riggs and his entire local crew under the bus. Turns out, my anonymous email had already set off internal alarms. My public reveal was just the final nail in the coffin. The Homeowners Association board imploded. Carol and 2 others resigned in disgrace after it was revealed they were getting kickbacks from Riggs to look the other way. The civil suit against me was dropped. The county rescinded the emergency injunction. The lies they had built their power on had all come crashing down. A few weeks later, there was a new meeting. The community center was packed again, but the atmosphere was completely different. The air wasn't thick with suspicion. It was filled with a cautious sense of renewal. They voted to establish a new oversight committee, one made up of residents, to review all future contracts. They asked me to chair it. I thought about it. I really did. It would have been the ultimate victory to go from outcast to leader. But as I stood there, looking at all their expectant faces, I realized I didn't want it. The fight had taken something out of me. What would you do? Take the power you've earned or choose peace? "Thank you," I said, stepping up to the microphone. "But I have to decline. I'm just a guy who wanted to coach some kids how to swim. I looked around the room. This community doesn't need one person in charge. It needs all of you. Watch each other's backs. Ask questions. Don't ever let anyone take your voice away from you again. I won, but victory has a price. The neighborhood looks at me differently now. I'm not just David, the quiet guy down the street. I'm the guy who took on the system and won. There's respect in their eyes, but there's also a little fear. The easy, casual friendships are gone, replaced by a polite distance. I'm a hero to some, a troublemaker to others. A symbol. And being a symbol is a lonely business. The pool is open again. My key card works. The other day I was there, sitting on a bench, watching the kids swim. The sun was warm on my face. The sound of their laughter echoed across the water. It was peaceful. I pulled out Elena's notebook. The cover was still stained, a faint reminder of where this all began. I flipped to the back, to the last page with her hurried, frightened note. They watch at night. I took a pen from my pocket. Underneath her words, I wrote my own. It felt like finishing a conversation we'd started a long time ago. I wrote, "Not anymore." I closed the notebook and placed it on the bench beside me. I didn't need to carry it with me everywhere now. Her memory wasn't a burden of guilt anymore. It was just a part of me. The fight was over. I had protected the last place that felt like her. And in doing so, I finally let her go. I stood up, took a deep breath of the clean, chlorinated air, and walked away, leaving the notebook there, a silent testament on a sun-drenched bench. I had found my peace, and it was time to find out what came next.